This is Brevard Watch, the news experience focused exclusively on Florida's Space Coast. Thanks for joining us. I'm Matt Reed. My thanks to Community Credit Union for sponsoring today's program. My guest today needs little introduction. He is the host of the eponymous Bill Mick Live on WMMB every weekday morning from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. Also, listen for the program on your iHeartMedia app, as I do. Bill, let's talk about today school security.
Sure.
Been in the news a lot. There's been political action, lots of public uproar about what is anybody doing to keep our kids safe. Sheriff Wayne Ivey came out and made an announcement or a proposal, along with some other things, to start a school marshal program. Mm-hmm. Looks an awful lot like what we see in legislation. It would arm select people on campuses or allow them to carry weapons after 132 hours of training. What do you make of this?
I think it's an excellent idea, and I think it's the only thing in the initial moments of a school shooting that will actually save lives. Stop and think about the typical response to any shooting situation by law enforcement. I had 17 years on the job. We get a call. That call comes to us via radio after someone has called dispatch, and dispatch says, oh, we have a shooting, we need to send policemen. There is at least a couple of minute delay. If you're lucky enough with an SRO somewhere on campus, how close is that officer? How long is his response time? So the only initial immediate response can be someone who is trained and armed to take out that shooter. I think it's a wonderful idea. I think the legislature in this last week had butchered that program a little bit to the point I would vote against the bill in what they've done now. What they've done is exempted teachers, saying that administration and staff can now be considered for this marshal program, but not teachers. So what, hashtag teacher lives don't matter? That's nuts. The people who are going to be on scene and closest to this happening, you don't know where it will occur in a school. Could it be a cafeteria? Maybe. Could it be a hallway like it was in Parkland? It could be anywhere. And if you don't have the ability to immediately defend against that active shooter with people who choose to be trained, then you're asking people to be victims and you're taking self-defense rights away from people who should have them. And I think it's a wonderful idea. The 132 hours of training, by the way, they're adding diversity training to that for another few hours. So whatever that does, I'm pretty sure that a gun doesn't understand diversity. It's the madman behind it that you have to worry about. But that 132 hours of concentrated training on one responsibility, do you know how many policemen get that in their career? Very few. Those people will be better trained than most of the policemen responding to the scene in handling active shooters, because academy training encompasses everything from crime scene investigation, state law, traffic law, accident investigation, chain of evidence, the courts, and those kind of things. So you're doing a comprehensive education in an academy setting. To get over 3 weeks of training on one particular venue, very unusual. You know when I had it? SWAT school. It took 3 weeks of training for me to be a certified SWAT cop. So let's think about the training they're actually providing, and they'll get more extensive training than most street cops get during several years of a career.
Just for our audience members who don't know, how many years did you spend as a police officer before you became a media personality?
17 years.
17 years. So you have a pretty good sense of what kind of happens in some live criminal situations.
Certainly.
Was there any avoiding the optics of or the fear that this proposal was arming teachers? We're essentially giving up on gun control, and we're just gonna arm teachers. That wasn't the proposal. I mean, the idea was, nor was it to just allow anybody with a concealed carry permit to walk onto campus.
Certainly not.
And bring their guns to work. This is something that apparently involves shoot, don't shoot training, other important decision-making training.
Certainly.
Especially if it's going to be something that we have statewide.
It's a program that from these initial looks, and let's face it, the legislature's been tackling this for 2 weeks. And I would be perfectly happy if they ended this regular session without a decision on this and come back in a special session to deal with this. Legislation is made to be done deliberately with dispassionate discussion and looking at facts. And there's a lot of emotion around this right now, as well there should be. But let's take a sincere look at what's going to be an actual solution to the immediacy of an active shooter. If you're not able to respond while he is acting right now, you're either looking for a place to hide or becoming a victim, and maybe both.
The one thing I want to clarify also for our viewers is that this was just one of the things that was 4 prongs that the superintendent, Desmond Blackburn, and Sheriff Ivey announced as a strategy, a proposed strategy for schools, the most important of them being education and awareness of students. What exactly do you do in the case of an active shooter? The students have said, we want to know. You know, we have fire drills. When's the last time our school burned down? But they can watch in the palm of their hand a school shooting happening, and they want to know, how do you save yourself?
And you've got to alleviate those fears and concerns. You get a lot of emotional reaction from kids right now. They're seeing their peers, even if they're from hundreds of miles away, they're seeing kids their own age die in a circumstance that they shouldn't.
And their fear is
It's
real.
horrific, absolutely, because you never know where this could take place. We can't afford to have the mindset that this will never happen in our community, because it's most certainly possible that it could. And having that training for the teachers, having the training for the kids at age-appropriate levels. You know, my daughter-in-law had to talk to my 6-year-old grandson, who goes to school across the street from this facility, that this could happen in your school, Liam, and you need to listen to what your teachers are telling you about being safe in school. And it breaks your heart that 6-year-old has to hear that. But it's important that they do. So the education is a very important part of this. And I find it odd that there are elements in the teaching profession, specifically the teachers' unions, who ignore the education element of what's going into this Marshall program. That 132 hours of training is virtually unprecedented for one particular activity. I never had that kind of intense training other than SWAT school.
Let's talk about something else that you recently have brought up, and that is, in a column, don't judge the deputies at Parkland who have been kind of lambasted early on for their decision whether or not to go running towards the gunfire and instead perhaps stayed outside. Your column said, hold off on judging them. Why?
We just found out this week. There were 2 stories out this week about what happened and what was going through. There were actually conflicting stories from the first deputy's lawyer and then from the department, I believe it was, saying what actually occurred during that time. And the stories actually say that he had become aware of a body on the football field at Parkland, at Douglas High School, that he believed the shooting to be coming from outside. The video looks bad, and I will acknowledge that. But I had a report from a listener that said he was on his telephone. That may have been the most effective communications tool that he had at the moment, better than the radio, depending on who and where he was getting information from. It's not like he was calling and ordering a pizza. You know, what's he doing on the phone at that time? He's gathering information or sharing information with somebody who can relate it to everybody else. So my concern is people were ready, and this officer had deputies from his home department, not his home department, but the department where he lived, guarding his home after he was outed, and the sheriff outed him as not having gone in when he should have went in. Well, then just this past week, there's a story by Fox News that the commander of the scene, who happened to be a female captain of that department, supposedly ordered them to stage, which means set up a perimeter and be ready to enter. But there were conflicting parts in the news story. I ripped Fox News hard for this. There was shoddy reporting on this story. They had a timeline. They knew when the communication happened. Supposedly, she said to stage. What she asked was, have they set up a perimeter, not go set up a perimeter. The timeline on it, the way the story reads, apparently was 11 minutes after the shooting started. That's 5 minutes after it stopped. So this kid was already on his way out. I think she was asking, is there a perimeter so we can get him if he's leaving? But they had law enforcement experts saying, well, anything she says on the radio is a command, not if she needs an answer to a question. So in both of those cases, We don't know what they were thinking. We don't know if they were relying on previous training. We don't know if they were relying on current training and protocol. We just don't know. And until those facts come out, and that investigation is probably still months away, it's wrong to judge those people. And that deputy got labeled as a coward when it appears he probably was doing the job as he should have done, as he understood a very dynamic situation as it occurred.
And it used to be standard procedure to wait until you had backup
Absolutely.
or 4 officers to go into a situation like that.
That's correct.
And it's hard. It gripped me because you can intellectually understand the statistics when they say that the body count is lower when an officer goes running in to stop an active
Sure.
shooter, but the other number shows that that officer has, a 1 in 3 chance of being shot dead himself.
That's true.
Or
And
herself.
you don't ask them to be indiscriminate sacrifices. You ask those officers to go in as safe a manner as is possible. You take the risk when you sign the line, but you ask them to do it appropriately with as much safety protocol as they can put in play.
Well, when we come back, the Florida legislature has passed several pieces of new rules that are meant to keep our schools safe. Will any of it work? We'll find out.
At Community Credit Union, we are always looking for ways, big and small, to make your life better. Manage your accounts online, anytime, anywhere, with eBranch Online and mobile services. Use your mobile device to check your balance, make a deposit, pay bills, apply for a loan, and more. It doesn't get any more convenient than this. Search for the CCU mobile app on your device and download it for free. At CCU, bringing you better options matters. Find out more by visiting ccuflorida.org.
Welcome back to Brevard Watch. I'm Matt Reed. My thanks to Community Credit Union for sponsoring today's program. My guest today is Bill Mick, host of Bill Mick Live on WMMB, 1240 AM. Of course, you can also hear his program on iHeartMedia, the app that so many of us have on our phone today. Bill, I want to get your take on some legislation at this hour. The Senate has passed this. It seems to be moving through Tallahassee. A $400 million school security bill includes $97 million for safe schools programming. I assume that can mean resource officers as well. $98 million to harden school buildings. $69 million for mental health services. $67 million for a school marshal program. These sound like big figures, but spread out across the whole state, that's progress, but it's not a lot of money. What do you make of that?
At the onset, it was a good idea. Sadly, as everything in Tallahassee or any legislative body, politics come into play. The gun control argument, something I have tried to steer my audience away from for the 3+ weeks we've been talking about this now. It's not talking about solutions. There are those who are going to want more controls on firearms in any circumstance. There are those who are going to hold on to the Second Amendment near and dear, and I count myself among those people, regardless. But that's not a solution in a situation like this. We have multiple failures on multiple levels that contributed to this occurring. Could fixing any of them stop it? Probably not. If you have the madman who has decided he is going to commit an evil act, if you could ban the sale of every firearm in the country, if you could confiscate every firearm that's out there now, that evil intended person is going to find a method, whether it be a bomb or a ball bat or a nail gun, to be able to wreak that havoc on a population that is confined in a defenseless zone, basically, other than whatever school resource officers are there now. That's why I'm really high on the Marshall program. I'm disappointed that the Florida Senate stripped out teachers from the Marshall program. I don't know if that's because of pressure from the teachers' unions, who came out very strongly against teachers being armed, but after talking with school board members here in Brevard, once this incident occurred, once the sheriff made his announcement that what they wanted to do in Brevard, there are teachers who are willing and qualified that would be able to go through this training and be an asset to law enforcement in that situation. In that active shooter scenario, we talked in the earlier segment about how long it takes policemen to respond, and it's the immediacy of the situation. It's also scattered across a school property, and these schools are pretty big places. If you're in a classroom in the 3rd floor on a wing that's 500 yards from where the classroom is, you're not going to be able to respond if you're the SRO up there dealing with a fight or something else. You're going to be too far away. Will the only thing that's going to be able to help is someone who is armed and ready to take that on and trained with that excessive training to be able to address it. So I like that idea. The mental health is certainly an aspect that needs to be dealt with, and that's going to involve DCF and other state agencies that have had engagement with this particular shooter and all of a sudden declared him okay.
A week before the Parkland shooting, I was part of a Brevard Public Schools contingent that traveled to Tallahassee with, I think, all 16 student government presidents, where they made their ask to our delegation and others for more mental health services on campus. A week later, this shooting happens, and it just seemed so prescient, especially as the student movements started springing up and talking about things and advocating for themselves. This bill, or the amount of money that they're talking about, was one of the things that those students from Brevard were supporting. If the students know their peers and they think they need help, and it seems like that's something to listen to.
I would agree with you there. My other concern, though, is when you say $97 million for safe schools, another $98 million for security upgrades, if you will. In the bill are a couple of different bureaucracies at the state level, and that worries me a little bit. Can we not do this and let it be locally administered and controlled? Maybe report to FDLE or report to the state school board, but another bureaucracy in the middle, the safe schools, whatever they're calling it. It just seems like a level of bureaucracy that doesn't need to be created, and money that could be better spent if they filtered it on down to the local level.
That's an interesting point, because I hear our superintendent and law enforcement, they're actually pretty innovative people. I mean, a lot of these school districts are pretty creative and clever about what they do with the resources, and they travel the state quite a bit to learn from each other, and maybe there is something that they should be able to experiment with when it comes to school security. The thing that I thought was interesting in this was still not talked about a lot, because I think the gun measures are the ones that
they get the attention.
They get all the attention.
Sure.
But it's attacking that nexus between somebody with real mental health problems and possessing the firearm. The bill that I read in the Senate would still this seemed new, prohibit a person who has been adjudicated mentally defective or has been committed to a mental institution from owning or possessing a firearm until they petition the courts for restoration of that right. That just seems to make sense on some level. But and it's not a perfect thing, but from a political standpoint, to get people together to agree on that as a compromise seems like a small step in the right direction.
I don't see that as a problem. In fact, I would have to go research the federal law right now, because if you have mental disease and you check on the form that you do when you buy the firearm, you don't get the firearm. I'm not sure what the specifics of the federal law is for federal firearms license dealers to be able to sell you a gun. But if this strengthens that protection, I think that's wise. And I don't think it's a compromise to go there. I think that's easy enough to sign off on. And that's true. The thing is, accountability for the people who are involved in engaging with those people. Are we asking people who aren't qualified to make that judgment call? That's where it's going to get sticky.
All right, fun question for you. There are student walkouts planned for March 14th, presumably peaceful demonstrations to commemorate the month anniversary of the Parkland shooting. If you were the principal and you knew this was coming, what would you do?
I would ask them to make it respectful. I would ask them to remember the victims. And I would make darn sure that the people running the Women's March, that the League of Women Voters, and others of the anti-gun crowd are not engaged and involved with these kids. This is something that belongs to the kids, and if that's something they feel they want to do. These dates bother me. They're picking dates. Somebody has a political agenda behind these dates, and we saw early on that the groups that I mentioned were actively participating in gearing students up for this kind of thing, trying to take advantage of a tragedy for their own little cause or their own little group. I thought there was a school in Palm Bay, and I don't remember which school it was. Might have been Bayside. Heritage. Walked out 17 minutes, one for each victim. Well done. Back to class. Good job.
That's going to be the model, as far as I know. The direction in Brevard is that the school board will have the principal's back, so you know your community. Just keep it peaceful. They want to see some collaboration between the principal and the student leaders of these things.
Absolutely.
But keep it peaceful and
Making
and
sure it's
constructive.
student leaders. That's the
But
thing.
also to be respectful of student speech as well, because
Sure.
we're educating young citizens. If they're going to stand up and be citizens, you want to not get in the way of them doing that necessarily.
An educational opportunity. Why not?
All right, well, when we come back, should schools notify parents about everything all the time? We'll ask our guest.
At Community Credit Union, we are always looking for ways, big and small, to make your life better. Manage your accounts online, anytime, anywhere, with eBranch Online and mobile services. Use your mobile device to check your balance, make a deposit, pay bills, apply for a loan, and more. It doesn't get any more convenient than this. Search for the CCU mobile app on your device and download it for free. At CCU, bringing you better options matters. Find out more by visiting ccuflorida.org.
This is Brevard Watch. I'm Matt Reed. My thanks to Community Credit Union for sponsoring today's program. My guest is Bill Mick, host of Bill Mick Live on WMMB AM here in Brevard County. Bill, I want to ask you about notifying parents under what circumstances we should do it. There was a situation in the news. Actually, it stemmed from a crisis averted more than a year ago at Astronaut High School. Titusville police investigated and arrested 2 students who they found had been discussing, perhaps plotting, an attack on the school in some obscure apps and corners of the internet. And when they searched the students' homes, they found weapons that gave them the means to carry out that attack, some of them pretty scary. The school cooperated with police and made no public comments during the open investigation, which actually took several weeks. And then once that investigation was closed, they briefed the staff, they allowed conversation about it, but didn't announce this publicly in a press release or in a notification to thousands of parents. At that point, it would have mainly a courtesy notification. And it was a rare case when they didn't notify everybody. My question is to you, I mean, should schools, both from a law enforcement and a communication perspective, should schools be notifying parents all the time of everything that happens on their campuses?
You throw the word all the time in there, and my answer becomes absolutely not. The key word that you said as you described what happened at Astronaut High is that a potential tragedy like the one at Parkland was averted. That means something was done right along the way. And working in conjunction with law enforcement, understanding their reasons for not publicizing this particular incident at the moment that they had been engaged in the investigation and they were following that up, I think that's wise. And as I understand it, knowing it's just broken this week, but as I understand it, the school personnel weren't necessarily notified of step-by-step how this went. Not law enforcement's habit to notify people of how their investigation goes or where it's going, but if they gave assurances that the school was safe and that this was not going to happen as a result of this particular incident, kudos to everybody involved. We could have been in the news a year before Parkland was, and that's a good thing.
Well, that's a good point, because people have talked about there being a new day for school security in Florida. Well, the new day in Brevard County happened after Astronaut. And this situation came up very quietly more than a year ago. It explains why the school board has been so determined to do things like accelerate some of the security fencing, are open to ideas like the sheriff's proposal for a marshal program.
Certainly. Even
some that could be potentially controversial. But I think this also shows that not everything always goes right. You had a teacher who spoke up and kept speaking up, and that was the difference. She went to somebody outside the school, went to law enforcement, the law enforcement investigated, but you also had a dean and a counselor who interviewed the student, and they reached the wrong conclusion, that that he wasn't a threat. I mean, what does that say?
Well, there are protocols, there are things you should do. Obviously, the teacher felt a legitimate threat here, and it was right. She reported it to the proper authorities. They dealt with it in her chain of command, as they should have, and they reached this judgment that you've said probably the wrong judgment here. But she knew the threat still existed. She was seeing, hearing things. Apparently, I don't know this yet, but maybe kids were seeing on the app where they were posting or talking or whatever, and the threat still seemed to exist. You never know where. We can no longer afford to say it's not going to happen here because you can't say where it's going to happen. I'm on a committee at my church talking about what are we going to do about security and safety for the people coming here. We want to be a welcoming, open place for people to come and practice their faith or seek their faith, and we want to be able to be welcoming to that, but we also have to be wary. And where's the line you draw, especially when you're in the faith business? And that's a little tough for a church to make a distinction, but you also don't want those parishioners to be a target of readily available people. So in each circumstance, you've got to be able to do what's right. This teacher did right, and good for her.
Absolutely.
But as far as notifying parents, no. Why cause alarm at that moment while the investigation's still going on? Why cause the potential for friends or associates of the kids who were the suspects in this case to take up their cause and, well, if they're gone, I'm going to step up and do what they were going to do? Better off left quiet, handled appropriately, averted a disaster, and then at the appropriate time, notifications going out. Whatever that, and that appropriate time may be never. But you averted a problem and you had a procedure in play that allowed that to occur. I think that's huge.
Yeah, one of the things that struck me since Parkland in Brevard County was just how many copycat situations there are. I didn't used to really think about that very much, but it appears that when impulsive young people want to disrupt school, they feel put down and they want to get power over their peers, they know that fear can do that they can share a threatening Snapchat picture, or they can call in a bomb threat, or even just write some graffiti on a bathroom wall. Next thing you know, there's the bomb squad sweeping Space Coast High School. What do you think the consequences for these kids ought to be once they get caught?
Depends on true motive and the lesson to be taught the kid. Is it something that necessarily ruins a kid's life? Maybe. But I can probably think of 5 or 7 incidents that were reported of these types of things. But as I talked to school board members and others, there were probably multiples of that a day that occurred for a few days after the incident, not all of them necessarily newsworthy, and you guys had to handle that. Fortunately, the legislature, when the kids at Space Coast Junior, Senior were charged, brought into court, the charge didn't exactly fit the law the way it was written. At that point, you could not threaten an institution, a building. And I'm thinking that can be as legitimate a threat as anything other than a bomb threat. That would have been legit. This was not a bomb threat. This was not a threat to a particular person. Therefore, it wasn't considered a threat.
There's a wrinkle in the law.
And that is being repaired in this legislative session, and we should know that for sure at the end of the week.
Based on some of the reactions, I don't want to put words or votes in their mouths, but for what I heard from the Brevard School Board, there was quite a bit of desire to see that law change.
Absolutely.
That people shouldn't be walking away from situations like that. Police in West Melbourne arrest a middle school age kid. Mm-hmm. This time they name him. They put his mugshot up on their Facebook page. The whole community knows exactly who this juvenile is. The schools would never do that. They can't do that. Do you think that was the right way to go?
I would leave that in the capable hands of the folks in law enforcement. And if they believe this to be a legitimate, sincere threat to the community, why not let everybody know at that point who it is? They've got it under control now. But given the way our justice system works, that kid could very well be right back in the community, right back in the very school that he was threatening. And yeah, somebody needs to know, keep an eye on that kid. If they believed it was legitimate, most certainly. If it was a prank, and everybody's going to claim it's a prank, so you got to use some discernment as a law enforcement professional, and you get there. You get to where the point that you can do that. At that point, you make the call, and I don't have a problem with it.
Well, somehow our community needs to pull together. Vigilance is still the best bet, and if the police think that we need to keep our eye on somebody, maybe that's exactly what we need to be doing.
Could very well be.
Well, thank you, Bill, for joining us in the studio today.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you for joining us. Hey, listen, if you're watching this on Sunday, listen to Bill Mick Live Monday morning. I will be joining Bill in his studio to talk about some of the school communication issues and what's happened since Parkland. I want to thank Community Credit Union, as always, for sponsoring today's program. I want to thank you for joining us. Watch us next week on Spectrum Channel 496 and on YouTube, #BrevardWatch.
At Community Credit Union, we are always looking for ways, big and small, to make your life better. Manage your accounts online, anytime, anywhere, with eBranch Online and mobile services. Use your mobile device to check your balance, make a deposit, pay bills, apply for a loan, and more. It doesn't get any more convenient than this. Search for the CCU mobile app on your device and download it for free. At CCU, bringing you better options matters. Find out more by visiting ccuflorida.org.